Hello and welcome back to the Nine Sports Podcast, Hockey Edition. I'm your host, Maya Smith, and I am so excited for this episode because we are going to have our very first PWHL player guest on the podcast. I'm so excited. This has been a long time coming, and I honestly feel like this is such a great way to kick things off with interviews on this show because my guest, I guess I'll just tell you, it probably says in the title, Malia Schneider is joining us at the end of the show. And our conversation was really great. She really gave some good insight into what it's like being a reserve player in the PWHL. And we also talked about PWHL Takeover Tour because right after I record this, I'm going to the Scotiabank Saddledome here in Calgary to watch the first PWHL game in um, Calgarian history take place. So I am so excited. I tweeted today that the last time I watched pro women's hockey in Calgary was when the CWHL still existed, and it was towards the end. The Inferno were playing at a little community rink that I grew up playing in, and I was so excited to see it. But now to be going to the Saddledome, where it sounds like 15,000 tickets have been sold. Um, I'm so excited to see the PWHL in Calgary, and even though I haven't heard the Calgary name being mentioned in takeover or in future expansion opportunities for next season, I really hope that this shows the PWHL that Calgary does deserve to be in the conversation at some point going forwards. I'll also be at the Edmonton game next week, so a lot of awesome Alberta hockey happening. So I wanted to bring on an Albertan to talk about what that's like. So we'll chat with Malia Schneider later on in the show. But we are going to do our number one at the nine here very shortly. It's been a lot. There's been a lot of news this past week in the PWHL with the trade deadline and the roster deadline and happening earlier this week. But first, we have our first clinched playoff spot. So let's jump into that. So the number one at the nine is your top headline of the week, and we are talking about the Boston Fleet, who are the first team to clinch a playoff spot this season, and actually it's the earliest it's ever been clinched in PWHL history. So even though last week on the show, Dylan and I were talking about how we weren't really sure if the Fleet would be able to keep this up, they are the first team to get it done and lock in that playoff spot. So the Fleet did not make the playoffs last year, which this season is almost more impressive considering they missed the playoffs last year. And this clinching game was even more amazing because they decided not to start Aaron Frankel, who has 3 back-to-back shutouts, and not even to start Abby Levy, who is their backup goalie, but to start Amanda Teely, who is the third string goaltender in Boston, and she got it done. They beat the Minnesota Frost and clinched that playoff spot. Now, the PWHL is interesting. If you've never been here for the playoffs before, the first finishing team in the regular season gets to choose their opponent um, for the first round. So this does not mean that Boston will be that number one seed coming out of the regular season, but it's a great head start for them. It's a great start to know that they are locked in and they can sort of figure out how they're going to approach the playoffs going forward. And it's a huge confidence booster for them to know that Erin Frankel actually isn't necessarily the only reason that they've been winning. Now, she's had a fantastic season so far. I think between her and Anne-Renee Desbiens, which I'm hoping to talk about next week, they are neck and neck for MVP and for goaltender of the year. So I'm not saying Erin Frankel has had a bad season. I think she has been a catalyst in the Boston Fleet getting to where they are now. But for them to be able to show that they can win and they can beat the highest scoring team in the PWHL, the Minnesota Frost, with their third string goaltender in net, that is just huge for them. So, um, when I'm recording this on Wednesday night, Montreal is currently playing the Vancouver Goldeneyes, and with a regulation win, they can clinch a playoff spot. So they would be the second team to be locked in. They can also do it without winning in regulation, but they have to rely on other teams to get that done. So their best case scenario, win in regulation and lock that in. That game is ongoing. So when you're listening to this, you probably already know if they clinched a playoff spot or not. And then Minnesota is kind of the next ones up there. I expect they'll be clinching a playoff spot soon. I don't know the math. I've kind of been relying on people to help me out with the math because it just doesn't make sense in my head of like what needs to be done. But they should be able to clinch soon. And then currently, as I'm recording this, although it will likely change because there are games tonight, Ottawa is in the fourth seed position, above Toronto by 2 points. They play each other tonight. That's the game that I'm going to. So huge standing implications. Then New York and Vancouver are tied in sixth and seventh, and Seattle is at the bottom. So far, nobody has been eliminated, which does mean that literally any of the teams could still make that top four, but it's going to be very difficult for those three teams, New York, Vancouver, and Seattle, to manage to oust teams like Ottawa and Toronto. So definitely we are standings watching as the season continues with only 7 or 6 games remaining, depending on the teams. And yeah, it's all to play for. So that's super exciting. Um, this week was also the trade deadline and the roster deadline. And so we only saw one trade at the deadline. I do think most teams were going to opt to stick with what they had. We will talk about all of the signings that happened before the roster freeze here in a minute, but I recommended that the Vancouver Goldeneyes not do anything. I think they finally are getting some of that chemistry that we have been looking for. Um, they've been looking for and fans have been looking for all season. And bringing somebody else in right now, that's just going to mess kind of with what they've got. They don't have major injuries and they didn't have them coming in to the trade deadline. So no real reason to shuffle players around. And I think a lot of teams operated under that same idea, but we did see one move, and that was a trade between New York and Minnesota. New York traded defender Jinsey Rose for forward Denisa Kryshova. I actually tweeted Kryshova World Tour because at the start of the season, she was a Vancouver Goldeneye. Right before the first game of the season, they traded her back to Minnesota, where they had taken her from expansion in exchange for Anna Szigeti. So she went back to Minnesota and now she is going to New York. And really, like, this is a deal that I think benefits both teams. I'm not sure we'll see a winner or a loser. Um, and I'm not sure that we really have historically with PWHL trades, but essentially, New York announced this week that Kristina Kaltenkova is out on long-term injured reserve. They have a couple injuries there, so really they just needed a forward to be able to fill kind of that mid-range level of forward spot. Obviously, it's very hard to replace the first overall pick, but other players can kind of move around in the lineup. So they just needed some solid offense, and they brought in Kryzhova for that. And then on the flip side, we saw Natalie Bookbinder go down with an injury earlier this month. And so Minnesota was looking for somebody to fill that kind of third or fourth pairing defender. And Jinsey Rose is a reliable defender. She's not the best defender out there by any means, but she can definitely fill that missing piece for Minnesota and shore up their back end as they fight for a playoff spot. And then hopefully, assuming they make the playoffs, into the playoffs as well, depending on how long Bookbinder is out. This is also important for New York to give a chance to see what their other defenders can do. They drafted, for example, Dale Ross this last season, and she was injured for a good chunk of this season. And now they need to see what she can do because the expansion draft is likely coming up this off season, and maybe if they miss the playoffs, they'll need to be looking at which parts they're going to move around to try and get this team into the playoffs in the fourth season of this league. So it gives both teams a way to fill gaps in their roster and also opens up some opportunities for players to prove that they deserve to be on this roster come the 2027 season. Seems crazy to even say 2027, but that's what they're looking ahead to. And also looking ahead, there were a number of signings that happened this past week as the roster freeze came into effect on Tuesday, mostly buoyed by the SDHL and the SWHL and the European leagues wrapping up their season. So a lot of players that were playing over there became available to be signed by PWHL teams. Now, they do need to have been drafted. Sorry, they don't need to have been drafted, but they need to have been eligible to be drafted. So they need to have put their name on the draft eligibility list in order to be considered to be signed by the PWHL. And we did see a number of former reserve players, players that went overseas to get more ice time in the SDHL and other European leagues, come back as teams push for the playoffs and were kind of stacking up their reserve player roles. So let's talk about those. Boston signed Noemi Noiborova. She used to play for the Scepters, but she did go overseas, and she is a reserve player. They've signed her to a reserve contract. The Goldeneyes signed Sini Karajalainen. I actually asked Malia Schneider about this because they did play together in Sweden, and she had some great things to say about Sini, so definitely stay tuned for that part of the episode. But she was also signed as a reserve player. The Scepters brought back Annika Rankila. She used to be a reserve player for them, and she went over to the STHL, and she's also a reserve player. And then the Frost signed Sam Cogan, one of the biggest names in the SDHL. She's a former Scepters reserve player as well, and yeah, she had a great season in the SDHL. So they have brought her into their team, but also as a reserve player. And then, really, what I think is the most interesting signing is the Torrent signed Gabrielle David. She was drafted by the PWHL Montreal at the time, but now the Montreal Victoire. And she was their reserve player for 2 seasons. She went to the SDHL, had a very strong season in the SDHL this year, and she is now back with the Torrent. And unlike most of these other signings, she's actually a standard player contract. That's what she was signed to because with Michaela Grant Mentis down with injury and a few other players also out with injury at that time, Seattle really actually needed a player to kind of shore up that position. And I actually was on the Seattle Torrent virtual availability with her and Teresa Schaffsall. They're 2 new players that they have. And it was interesting to hear David talk about her time in Montreal, and she said she was so honored to have been drafted by Montreal. It's where she's from, and she really wanted to play there. In her first season, she did get some more ice time, but she wasn't really happy with her play. In the second season, they moved her to reserve, and as you'll hear from Malia later in this episode, the reserve players do a lot of training, but they don't get much, if any, actual game time. And Gabrielle was basically saying that she lost a lot of confidence in her game and she wasn't really sure what type of player she was anymore. And so she did choose to make this move back to the SDHL in order to get some more ice time and just remind herself of the type of hockey player that she is. And she definitely did that. Now she's ready to come back to the PWHL, make a mark with Seattle. The PWHL is where she wants to be, and she's really ready to show that. So I think that's super exciting and definitely a player to keep an eye on as the Torrent finish out their season with her in the lineup. The last kind of housekeeping of the week, a bunch of players are back from their Olympic injuries. So Hillary Knight, Kendall Coyne Schofield, and Erin Ambrose have all returned from injury, which is just such a boost for all of those teams. We're talking about 3 of the best players in this league, 3 players that were instrumental at the Olympics for their national teams and then have kind of left a hole in their PWHL teams as they've been recovering from injury. So definitely will be a huge boost for the Torrent to get Hillary Knight back. The Frost have played great without Kendall Coyne Schofield in the lineup, but she's a huge piece of the lineup. She's their captain. She's a big backbone of the team. So it will be great to have her back. And then Erin Ambrose, the defense in Montreal has been playing really well without her there. Dylan mentioned last week how much the other players have stepped in to kind of fill their role, especially Nicole Gosling, the rookie defender. But it will definitely be a boost for Montreal to have Erin Ambrose back in the lineup. There is no doubt about that. And yeah, she'll definitely look to make a difference as they push for the playoffs. Before we jump into my interview with Malia Schneider, let's talk about top shelf predictions from last week because Dylan ended up breaking the streak. We were on two consecutive predictions coming true, but the Boston Fleet surprised the entire league, I would say, by defeating the Minnesota Frost in the game that Dylan said he thought would be a huge showing for Minnesota, thought that they would kind of stomp on the Fleet. And I have to say that as soon as I saw that they were not starting Aaron Frankel, I immediately thought that Dylan's prediction was going to come true, but the Fleet really pulled through. Amanda Teely played great, as I said earlier, and the team just kind of rallied around having her in the net, and they beat Minnesota. So Dylan's prediction was incorrect. I'm going to make a prediction that the Seattle Torrent will be officially eliminated from playoff contention by the next episode. I don't actually know the math on that, but my prediction is that they will be the first team eliminated, and I do think it's got to happen soon. So that is my prediction. And now for what I'm most excited about. Earlier this week, Malia Schneider joined me as our first player guest on this podcast. It was a great interview. She's from Millerville, Alberta, which is just about 45 minutes outside of Calgary. And I just wanted to talk to her about what it means to have PWHL games in Alberta. She isn't traveling with the team for their game in Edmonton next week. She was with the team when they went to Edmonton over the winter break, December game, and she just talked about how great it was. And we talked about how exciting it is for young players coming up to see that this is something they can do because she and I both grew up. Not having that as an option. So, she's also a reserve player for the Goldeneyes currently. So we talked a little bit about what that's like and how she's been finding it and finding the transition to come back from the SDHL. Before she joined the Goldeneyes, she played her collegiate career at Colgate University, and was originally a member of PWHL Ottawa, playing a couple of games there on and off as a reserve player before going to Sweden to play for Brynäs and SDE. But now she's back in North America with the Vancouver Goldeneyes, and she chatted with me on Monday. So here's my conversation with Malia. Awesome. Well, welcome, Malia. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful sunny day, so can't complain.
Yeah, it's nice. I think we're both in Vancouver right now, and it's nice to
Mm,
like see the sun. So we'll take
absolutely.
it.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, first I just wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about how the season's going. I'm sure coming, back here, being a reserve player, things like that, it just kind of takes time to adjust. So, how has it been
Mhm,
going?
mhm. Yeah, it definitely takes time to adjust, obviously. It's growing up playing hockey, you're not really used to a reserve role, so it's definitely a learning curve, but I think it's helped me grow mentally, as well as a hockey player. So I'm really just honored to be able to be presented with this opportunity, and it's going to be what I make it. So giving it my best shot, growing as much as I can in and out. So so far so good.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what your like day-to-day life looks like as a reserve player? I guess you're probably busier when the team is in town, but,
Mhm.
just kind of talk us through that.
Yeah, I think like the one of the biggest questions is like, so like, are you still involved with the team as a reserve player or not? And you, when the team is here on site, like we're 100% with the team. So everything they do down to like breakfast in the morning, then we have some sort of workout if it's a lift activation or primer or anything like that. Like we're always involved. We're on the ice for the full practice, anything like that. And then we have lunch with the team if there's any team meetings, video sessions, pre-scouts, all of those kind of things. We're all in on that. So that's like normally a practice day. On game day, it's a little bit different. So for those the reserves as well as the ones that are not dressing will pretty much run like let's say the game is at 7 p.m. That morning, the team will probably have a pregame skate or some sort of activation off ice as well. Most of the time for our team, it's optional on ice, optional, like you get to choose if you want to be on the ice or in the weight room, kind of doing an activation like I mentioned. But most of the time for the reserve players, where we want to be on the ice. So we all jump on the ice. We'll practice with them, maybe like a little extra conditioning at the end of it. And then afterwards we'll go and get a lift in. So that'll most of the time look like a conditioning circuit kind of thing, just because we're not playing obviously that day. But then we get to go home, hang out the rest of the day, and then come back for the rink for game or just like an hour before game time, right before on ice warm ups. Go in the dressing room for pregame kind of thing, and then head up and watch the game and cheer our team on.
Awesome. So you kind of do get to build kind of like a good relationship with your teammates as well, even if you're not always on the ice with them during the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I would say like we're still obviously a part of the team, and I think my teammates obviously make a point of making sure that we feel included. And so we're very lucky to have like a team like that. And so yes, we're definitely still involved with the team and everything.
That's great. I'm glad that you still kind of get that like team aspect.
Yeah.
So both of the PWHL takeover tour games that are happening this week, Wednesday to Wednesday, I guess,
Mhm.
are in Alberta, and we're both from Alberta. What does it mean to you when you see pro hockey being played in the province, even if you're not
Mhm.
necessarily there doing it?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like all of the takeover tour games. It's just been so cool to see how many different people have been able to access it from like especially in Alberta, like we were lucky enough to and I was lucky enough to go to the first takeover tour game in Edmonton at the start of the season. And like my grandma, who on the 18th turned 96, like she was able to
Wow.
go. So, like, it's just been so cool for obviously being in Alberta, just for family to be able to go and see it and see me and such. So, I've played obviously in Europe the past couple of years, but then also at college. So a lot of them haven't seen me play in person. They're loyal online watchers, thank you. But like they haven't been able to see me play in person for a long time. So I think that is just so cool. But then also just everyone being able to access like elite women's hockey around the world with all the takeover games has been awesome.
Yeah, it's super cool to see, and just like, what you said about having your family be there after playing, all over the world for a few years. That's
Hmm.
just got to be a fantastic feeling. And I mean, you're not too far away in Vancouver either, but there's just something about like home ice.
Hmm. Absolutely. No, totally. Yeah.
And when you think about, growing up, I think we're similar age. So, growing up, like, you obviously played much better hockey than I did, but there wasn't really this, place to see yourself. You kind
Hmm.
of were like, I can go to college, and then it's like, well, I don't know where I'm going to end up. Do you think that,
Hmm.
like, now having these games in Alberta is helping to kind of grow girls hockey in Alberta?
Hmm. I hope so. I can't imagine it not. I mean, obviously representation is a huge thing. And a lot of the times, like the quote, you have to see it to believe it. Of course, like that's a saying for a reason. So that just being a thing, I think the takeover tours in Alberta is just going to be awesome. Like I think people need to see women's hockey. I think young girls need to see themselves in future ways. Like I think it's incredibly exciting, and I wish I had something like this. when I was a child. I think that would have been the coolest thing ever. I still fangirl over half of my team, like all of my team really, So it's so cool even as a player on the team, but also I can't imagine how exciting it must be for like younger girls growing up and being able to picture that and be like, "Whoa, that's something I could actually do."
Yeah, when I went to the Edmonton game last year, as a fan, it was so cool to just see all of the girls in their jerseys,
Mhm.
you know, hanging out, and like even at Goldeneyes games, like the girls are there and they're so excited to meet these players, as excited as like we would have been growing up to meet like a male
Mhm.
NHL player or like a female Olympian or something like that. And it's so cool that they get to
Absolutely.
just like they're just there and they get to watch them every night.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So for we'll kind of wrap it up here, but today when we're recording this, which is Monday, Vancouver signed a new reserve defender to the team, and I was
Mhm.
doing a little research, and I think you guys played together. Is that correct?
Yes, we did. Yeah. So
Awesome.
I found out who it was the same time everyone else did online. So I obviously was like, "Oh my God, Cindy!" Like I texted her right away, and I was like, "This is so cool! Like I'm so excited." And she's already in London on her way to Montreal to meet the team there. So I mean, even that is just so cool. Like these young girls in Alberta are gonna be able to watch these players skate and play, and then they're gonna be able to play hockey, and the places that hockey has taken me is just amazing, and the people I've met through it, so I hope if anything, and they don't maybe not everyone can go pro, like, obviously, and maybe not everyone wants to, but just the places hockey will take you and the people you'll be able to meet is so cool. It's such a small world, so
Yeah, like what are
Mhm.
the odds that you play with a Finnish player in Sweden and then now
Yeah.
you guys are teammates in Vancouver?
I know.
That's
I would
awesome.
not have
Yeah.
believed that. Mhm.
What do you think Golden Eyes fans should know about her as a player?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, she off the ice, just a great person, and then on the ice, she's a hard competitor. She's gonna be really great for our D core. She's strong defensively, but also is quick with moving the puck and getting pucks to the net. So I think that's something that's really gonna benefit us and be something that's we can utilize. And I think also in practice and in games, like she's someone that's gonna outcompete you or at least try to. And so whenever you have a player like that on your team, like that's incredibly helpful just for bringing up compete levels. And obviously with us on a massive playoff push right now, like that's kind of exactly what we need. So I'm excited to have her and to hang out with her again off the ice, but also compete with her on the ice as well.
That's awesome. I'm sure everyone will be excited to hear that, and
Mhm.
hopefully we'll get to see her play and you as well, either before the end of the season or in next season. But thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Is there anything you want to say to people listening?
Just thank you. I mean, for the Goldeneyes fans, everyone that I talk to, they've been so supportive, and all of my friends who have been able to come to a game, like everyone mentions your fans are so cool. Like everyone there is having so much fun, and I'm obviously sitting in the stands as well for a lot of them. So just thank you for being there and showing up. Like that's something that's incredibly exciting for us, and it gives us another level of compete as well. Just being able to do it for all of the fans. Like you're our sixth player on the ice, so or seventh really. So thank you.
That's
Mhm.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your season.
Thank you so much.
What a great conversation you had with Malia. I really appreciated her insight into what it's like to be a reserve player, how they build their days around what the team is doing, what the kind of starting team is doing, and also just love talking about the joy of hockey in Alberta and the PWHL, being here for a couple of takeover tour games this year. So, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that interview and also all of the roster talk and playoff talk. There will be much more playoff talk coming up as we are in crunch time for clinching playoff spots. The gold plan will be coming into effect soon. So stay tuned for all of that in future episodes. If you're not already subscribed or following, definitely follow along with the Nine Sports podcast. We have basketball and soccer coverage as well. And of course, subscription to the Nine Sports helps myself and other journalists do this work and make this dream happen. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next episode.